Okay. Um, so we had some issues with the slides this morning, so I'm going to have to turn around every now and again to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Thanks so much for letting us be with you this morning. We really love visiting Aboit, and you all are, in my opinion, uncommonly informed about what we actually do. So when people are actually introducing us and saying what we actually do, it's really good and refreshing. And I know that there was a video sent out maybe a couple weeks ago, and so I'm very thankful for that too. But I do want to give a little quick, before I get into the word this morning, introduction to our ministry and quick update about some of the things we do. We are the Vrujinks, and we're missing several today because Isaac started to feel a little sick. But Christian is our oldest, and he is turning 18 and going off to college this summer, or in just a couple weeks. And then Abby is over here. She's 16. Isaac is 12, and Hannah is 10. And my wife, Rachel, is around somewhere, too. So you can catch up with them later. So that is a big thing. Two big family updates for us. The first one was, as I mentioned, Christian is going off to college this year, so that's a big change for our family. And then the second big one for me is 3.5 years cancer-free, so that's the Lord's blessing, and good news for that, obviously, too. So we live in, and I know I make the same joke every time, so if you've been here, you know I make this joke. We are missionaries in Thailand, not Taiwan. Thailand, not Taiwan. Because my own sister, for 3 years, thought we were in Taiwan. So we have, just to give you an idea of the size of Thailand and kind of where we live, when we're here in the U.S., we live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's usually our home base. And so we put Chiang Mai right there, kind of where Grand Rapids is in Michigan. And you can see, if you drive all the way south in Thailand, it's going to take you all the way down to northern Florida. So it's probably significantly bigger than you thought. I'm assuming for most people that's a surprise. It takes a long time to get basically anywhere. So if you go down south, it's going to take quite a long time. But even over to the east there, it takes about 16, 17 hours to drive over there. So that's where we are. And the main thing we talk about is just the big need. There's a huge educational need in Asia. This is a really famous graphic. It's not a Christian one necessarily. Just to give you a sense of scope, there's more people that live inside of that circle than live outside of it. 67% of the world's population lives in that circle, and you can see that a lot of it's actually ocean. So we have very high population density. There's a lot of people. India and China are in there, of course, so that kind of sets it off. But I want to give you a different graphic as well. You can see that the latest edition of Operation World, it estimated there was about 26,000 people a day becoming Christians in Asia. So that is a huge, huge number. And it's a huge blessing, but there's really a lot of challenges with that as well, because these are people, for the most part, that don't even have any cultural background knowledge of Christianity. No cultural knowledge of the Bible, anything. They're just coming to Christianity and the gospel and not really knowing anything. And when you have that many people, there's a lot of issues with false teaching and heresy. It's really difficult, in addition to that, to get Bible training in a lot of these places. And that's what that graphic there on the right is. That's from Voice of the Martyrs. Every year they release their list of the top persecuted countries in the world. So you can see North Korea there is number 1. But the main thing we want you to get from that graphic is that Thailand, we're grayed out. We're not a persecuted country, but we're surrounded by persecuted or limited access countries. And so in addition to just being difficult anyway to get Bible training in Asia, we're surrounded by countries where it's even more difficult due to government restrictions or cultural restrictions that make it difficult to operate in those places. And so what we do at ABTS, and I appreciate you saying the full name, which is a mouthful, Asia Biblical Theological Seminary. ABTS is, we say we're a seminary in a suitcase because we don't require our students to come to us. We're headquartered in Chiang Mai in Thailand, but we travel out to all of these countries to teach classes, and we do a mix of online but also face-to-face, and so you get all of your face-to-face class time in about 1 week. And we travel to all these places that have limited access, but we have a number of sites where we teach in the Philippines, 2 in India, a couple in in Thailand, of course. And then the big ones that are huge for us this year, we're opening a Masters of Christian Counseling program. It starts in January. And we're opening in Nepal, in Kyrgyzstan, and Indonesia, which are all in one way or another limited access. And so this is a really big opportunity for them and for us. We've had to change some of our application procedures to make it a little safer for them even in some of these places. But it's a really exciting time for the seminary. Our enrollment has quadrupled in the past year. And so there's a lot of exciting things going on. And we reach a really broad range of students up in the upper right there. That's a group of Christian CEOs in Bangkok. That was the last class that I taught. And they basically had a Bible study, and over time it turned into a loose network of churches. But they're a really cool group. But one of the first classes I taught for ABTS was actually for a group of students in a refugee camp in Thailand. The My La refugee camp has been there for as long as I've been alive, and in about a mile and a half or 2 square miles or less, there's about 45,000 to 50,000 people living. And most of these people, most of my students have never left that camp. They were born there, and they've never left it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them later. So I teach Old Testament for the seminary. I'm the Old Testament professor and director of online education. So that's what's going on with ABTS, and I'll share a little bit more as we open God's Word as well. I want to talk a little bit about Rachel's ministries, because she's involved in a lot of things. She homeschools our kids, but she has successfully finished homeschooling one of them, so that's a fourth of the way there, at least. She also is an administrator at the Chiang Mai Homeschool Co-op, which serves about 100 kids, 120 kids in Chiang Mai, about 40 families. And so they meet every Monday, and she helps run that. And so that's a big part of what she does. And for a lot of families, they've come and said, this is one of the reasons we can stay on the field, because if they're homeschooling, but there's a lack of fellowship or anything that can be done to connect, it's really difficult. And so it really plays a big role in a lot of families' lives. And so she's happy to be a part of that. She has a lot of other opportunities as well, different Bible studies, just to get an idea of what it's like in Chiang Mai. This women's Bible study in the bottom there, we have a lady from the Philippines, Germany, Australia, America, Korea, and China, right? Just in that group. And then other opportunities, that one in the upper right, she was invited by a friend of ours who's Thai. They run an organization for sex-trafficked women and children, and so it's a compound, and they teach them a trade and lots of other things and do recovery. So they invited her to speak and to share her testimony there, and we also both had an opportunity a couple months later to do a family camp where they're doing kind of family education and speak for that as well. So she has a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different kinds of speaking like that as well, so she's involved in a lot. So my main thing is ABTS, the seminary. Her main thing is homeschooling and the homeschool group and other speaking opportunities. But then together, we both work with the youth at our international church. We started about 7.5 years ago working with the youth. We've been in Thailand 8 years, so it was pretty quick. Our youth group is about 100 kids, 6th to 12th grade. So it's a big group, but again, the challenge there is we have kids from America, Australia, lots of countries in Europe, Korea, China, Thailand, all mixed together. So it's a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but we're looking forward to kicking off literally 3 days after we get back to Thailand. So pray for us. Our vision and all the things that we do, and you've seen it, you can see it out there, and I've shared before, but is we have 3 E's, so they're easy to remember: equipping, empowering, and expanding. So our goal is we want to give leaders in Asia the tools and the knowledge that they need to reach their own people, to have a strong biblical foundation, and to go to their churches and to teach their people, right? And so that strengthens the church in Asia, and they go out and expand God's kingdom in Asia. One of the best examples of what we're trying to do and why we do it the way we do it, I think, is China. I'm a missions history nerd, and Protestant missions came to China in the early 1800s. For about 100 years, it was just wildly unsuccessful. So few people coming to Christ. And so in about 1915, 1917, they started having a series of meetings about what can we do about this. And they wanted to turn over the church to the Chinese believers and to start doing that, to start training them. And they started over a couple decades doing that, and it was mildly successful. But then communism came in 1949. All of the missionaries got kicked out, and the church in China exploded. Right? So that was when the commonly cited statistic, 10,000 people a day just in China becoming Christians. Why? Because the Chinese people were reaching the Chinese people. And that's really what our goal is to train people to reach their own people. Because, transitioning now into the sermon, I'm a big white guy, you may have noticed. And I always stick out. When we were in Asia, we worked in Chinese churches in America for a number of years too, and it was always easy for my wife to find me because I was like this much taller than most people and white, right? Now when we're here, it's like I'm a chameleon, right? I just camouflage, especially our church in Michigan is pretty white. And when we're in Asia, we really stick out. And the thing is, you may have heard this term before, but our kids in particular, they're called third culture kids. Right? Because they are American, kind of, but they live in Thailand, but they're not Thai either, right? And even us as missionaries, you may have heard missionaries talk about it before, that there's not really a place that you can call home, right? Because by default, if someone asks me where home is, I'm probably going to say Thailand. We spend most of our time there. But there's a big part of me and a big part of my heart that is not home, right? And for our kids, it's even more confusing because they're not American culture, they're not Thai culture, they're that middle part of the Venn diagram, and it can be really confusing. And no matter where we are, it's not quite home. And I think for me, one of the biggest times I realized this is when we're just about to come back to America, and we start thinking about all the foods that we want that we can't get in Thailand. And like my brain and my heart want that food, and then we come here and we eat it, and my stomach does not want that food, right? So even my body parts are confused about what exactly is going on and what culture I'm supposed to be. And so we want to talk this morning about what it means. We'll come back to that later. What it means to live as foreigners. And so we're going to be in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29. Ooh, something funny going there. That's okay. We're going to be in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verses 1 through 14. And before we even get there, before we jump there, I want to help kind of frame us to understand why we're talking about Jeremiah. I'm an Old Testament professor, so I'm contractually required to preach on the Old Testament. So I had to do that. But to give you a New Testament connection, in 1 Peter in general, he talks to people in the introduction of the book, but also in chapter 2, he refers to them actually as foreigners. Like you as a Christian, everyone who is a Christian is a foreigner, is in some way, what I just talked about, a third culture person, right? Because you were born into this earth, you live on this earth, but you are not quite home, right? We talk theologically about already, not yet, like Christ's kingdom is already here, but not yet fully. And we feel that and we experience that as Christians because we are meant for heaven, the new earth. We have our hearts and our minds in a different place, but we are here, right? And so Peter, he's speaking to them, and he tells them that they are foreigners. In chapter 2, it says, "Beloved, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh." He's saying, live differently because you, in this world, are a foreigner and an exile. You're in a place that is not your true home. Okay, so how this connects is that we're going to look at Jeremiah's advice to the exiles, the people of Israel, as they had been pulled from another land to a place that was not their home. What did he have to say to them? Because I think if we read it, there's a lot of advice for us today as foreigners, as Christians in the world in which we live. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the first 14 verses of Jeremiah chapter 29, but we're going to focus in on just a couple of those. You're going to see there's a lot of Old Testament-y names. So we'll just go through that once, and then we'll focus in on a couple verses. Starting in verse 1, it says, "These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jeconiah and the queen mother, the eunuchs, the officials of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen, and the metal workers had departed from Jerusalem. The letter was sent by the hand of Elisha, the son of Shaphan, and Gemariah, the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to Babylon, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. It said, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream. For it is a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I did not send them, declares the Lord. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile." So, as we look at this passage today, we're going to get to the famous verse that comes later that everyone knew as soon as I started to read it. But when we think about this passage as a whole, the big idea that we're looking at to get from this passage is that living as foreigners, for us, what Peter was saying, living as foreigners for Christians means seeing exile as a mission that is built on hope. I would add to that, built on true hope. And we're going to talk about what that means. So living as exiles means seeing our exile as a mission that's built on true hope. Okay, so I want to give you some context, and I'm well aware of my time, so I will limit my context to this passage to all of the Old Testament. But we'll do it really quickly, okay? So we get to Genesis chapter 1, God creates. Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve, they fail. There is consequence, there is punishment. And then as we go through the rest of those first 11 chapters of Genesis, the real point of it is just to show the constant failing of the people that God has created, but his constant faithfulness and always kind of changing. And not God is unchangeable, but from the people's perspective, like, let's try this, let's try this. There's a flood, and he renews the earth. And so he tries with Noah, and then we find out that Noah, he's not really the guy we hoped he was going to be. Something a little funny happens. So we get to Genesis chapter 12, and he chooses one family, the family of Abraham. And right away, God calls him. He says, go to a place that I will call you. I'll give you a land, a nation, and you will be a blessing to all the earth. And Abraham says, yes, I will go. And then the very first story, Abraham blows it big time. Like, first thing that happens, he does something dumb, okay? And then we get another story where he does okay. And then he does something dumb. And then another story where he does okay. And then he does something dumb, right? So if you've ever studied the life of Abraham, he's commended for his faith in Hebrews chapter 11. But if you're reading it in the book of Genesis, it's very up and down, right? Because the purpose of his story, in many ways, is to show God's faithfulness in spite of his stupidity in a lot of cases, his unfaithfulness in some cases. And then we get his son Isaac, and what story do we get about Isaac? Well, we get kind of a provision for his wife, and then he makes the exact same mistake that his father Abraham made. So again, the narrative's trying to tell us something here. And then we get Jacob, who's even worse. Like, you take Abraham and make all of his mistakes like 5 times worse, and that's Jacob. By the time we get to Joseph, he's pretty good. Okay, so we'll just skip that part. But so we see a lot of major mistakes in the book of Genesis. By the time we get to the end of the book of Genesis, the promises that were given to Abraham, none of them have happened, right? They're not in the land that was promised. They're not a nation, they're just a family. And maybe they've kind of been a blessing by providing food during the famine, but not really to the whole earth. So we jump to Exodus, a couple 100 years, 400 years, and they're in basically the same place. They're not in the land. They're in slavery in Egypt. They are a really large group of people, but they're not really a nation yet, and they haven't really been a blessing. And so Exodus is this story about God turning this big ragtag group of people into a nation by forming a covenant with them. And what happens the moment he forms that covenant? They mess up big time. They worship a golden calf. Like, I had this picture in my mind when I was a kid about how maybe Israel started out really well and then over time turned away from God. They didn't start well, okay? Like, the Old Testament's just the story of a people that constantly fails to keep God's covenant, and he is just constantly faithful. And so we get the wandering in the desert because they don't believe in God's promise and his faithfulness. And then you get the book of Deuteronomy, which is the retelling of the covenant and the law to a group of people that were just maybe kids when this whole failure first went down. And so this is the second giving of the law, Deuteronomy. It's for a new generation. And in there you get one of the most important chapters in the Old Testament. And I know you all know it. It is Deuteronomy chapter 28, right? Because you all remember that one. But it is probably the most referred to chapter in the rest of the Old Testament as you keep going back to it. And it's the one that says, if you go in the land and you do what I tell you to do and you follow my commandments, you will have these blessings, right? So choose life, do this. You know, the choose life part comes a little later. But he says, if you do not follow my commandments and you turn away from me, these are the curses that will come upon you, right? Blessings, curses. And some people look at that and might say, well, God is so judgmental. But really, I think it's a sign of God's patience, because I always say it's like when our kids were little, maybe you guys did this. You say, you need to come here right now before I get to 0, and you're like, 3, 2, 1.5, 1.25, you know, like no one thinks that you're being more judgmental when you slow down the count, right? You're being more patient. And I think that's what's going on in Deuteronomy 28. So a lot of the prophets, we start to get the prophets calling people back to God, and they're always pointing to this. The book of Amos, he very specifically, in the same order, points to things that are happening that line up with Deuteronomy 28. But it's really the key to understanding all the prophets. And so we get so much idolatry and trouble that the kingdom splits. In the northern kingdom of Israel, it's taken into captivity. And then we are now entering Jeremiah territory. We're finally getting to Jeremiah. We have the southern kingdom of Judah. And God calls Jeremiah, he's called the weeping prophet, because God calls him and says, I'm going to call you to speak to these people, and they're not going to listen to you. And you need to keep speaking to them, but they're not going to listen to you, and they're going to hate you. And so the first about 15 chapters of the book is Jeremiah doing that and really struggling and actually accusing God eventually, who's saying, why have you tripped me up? Why have you done this to me? And God says, well, Jeremiah, you need to repent and I'll restore you. And Jeremiah does repent. And he restores him and he says, now you get to do the task again, to speak to people that won't listen to you. Okay? So it's so bad that the king, when Jeremiah sends him a letter, even tears up the scroll and throws it in a fire, right? So we're talking extreme levels of not listening here. So this is the context that brings us now. He's warning the people, and now some people have been taken into exile, okay? So that was a really brief Old Testament rundown, but for Jeremiah 29:11, it's really important that we get a lot of context so we understand what it is and is not saying. So we get to this chapter here. People have been taken into exile, and there are false prophets, people that are saying what other people just want to hear. So they've been taken, they're confused, they're angry, they've been defeated, they've been taken to a place that's not their home, that they don't like, they hate it. And so prophets are saying to them, don't unpack your suitcases, you're only going to be here like 2 months, right? And so Jeremiah gets the pleasure of writing a letter that says, no, it's going to be 70 years. So this is what you need to do. So this is our context leading into this passage where Jeremiah writes this letter. And right before Jeremiah 29:11, it actually says the 70-year part. And so we'll come to that in just a second. But as we look at this passage, we're going to do pretty quickly 3 main points about what I think Jeremiah is saying to the people of Israel, and then also, therefore, to us. In verses 4 through 6, he's saying, I want you, when you're in this land, the idea, the philosophy you need to have is not just to exist, but to invest, right? So his advice or his orders to these people that are living in a land that's not their own, they're exiles. He says, I want you to plant gardens. If you're going to be there for just 2 months, planting a garden is pointless, right? For our family, planting a garden at any time is pointless because we kill everything. The only thing we've ever kept alive is our kids and our dog. So it wouldn't work out for us. But he tells these people to plant gardens, which is going to take a long time to come to fruition. He says, put down roots in the place that God is taking you. Even though you hate this place, you need to put down roots and understand that this is not just a place that you're passing through, but it's a place that is now your home, right? And so he even says you should have your kids get married so those kids can have kids. This is a long-term plan. He's saying, don't just see yourself as someone who is here. You need to see yourself as someone who is investing in the place where you are. And I sometimes get myself in trouble, so I have to temper my words a little bit. I don't like most hymns, like old hymns, I should say. I think there's a couple, like maybe 20 or so really great old hymns. And then especially when you get like the American, not quite so old, we're talking maybe 100 years or less old, there's a lot of them that are really bad, like theologically. And a lot of them that have kind of a variation on, this world's not my home, I'm just passing through, or I'm thinking only of heaven, or something like that. And that's terrible. Like, it's not what we're called to do. It's not what we're called to be. Basically, that is exactly the idea that the false prophets were giving the people that were in exile, saying, don't worry about it. You're just here for a short time. Just live, and you're going to be out of here soon. But Jeremiah says, no. You are here for a purpose, to do something. God has put you here for a reason. And so that leads us to the second part here. It says, seek shalom. Now this comes in I have it up there, verse 7. It says, but seek the welfare of the city where I sent you into exile. So this is really unusual because I teach Old Testament. People don't know usually a lot of Hebrew words, but if they know a Hebrew word, it is usually shalom, right? It's used as a greeting, but most often in the Old Testament, it means peace, right? It's translated as peace. Now, if any of you are multilingual, you might know that with languages, it's not like words are not a one-to-one perfect lining up there. It's not like shalom equals peace exactly. It's always more like this, where there's some overlap, but sometimes the meaning's not exactly the same, and that's definitely the case with this word. And I'm going to say something that sounds a little weird, but peace, I think, in English is, it's obviously a positive word, but it has it's a lack of something, I think often is what we think of it as. Like, peace is a lack of fighting, right? Or if you have inner peace, it's a lack of anxiety or something like that. And so in a lot of ways, it can be something that indicates a negativity, even though it's a positive thing to have. But the Hebrew word shalom is very positive, and I think we need to get that in here because in this passage, it's not translated as peace, at least in the ESV, it's welfare. So shalom in the Old Testament is when something comes to completion, that is shalom, or it's restored to completion. So, for example, in Nehemiah chapter 4, when they're rebuilding the wall, and when it is eventually completed, they say that they're restoring the shalom of the wall, right? It's not peace. It's they're making something that was missing something. They're now making it whole. They're bringing it to completion, okay? And then also in the book of Leviticus in chapter 6, it talks about restoring shalom in relationships. When you go to a person and you restore the relationship with that person after there's been some arguing or an issue, it's called bringing shalom to the relationship. And then also in Isaiah, the famous passage with the lion laying down with the lamb, it says they're living in shalom. And it's not just a lack of fighting. The whole thing it's communicating is that it's a whole different way of existing for those animals, right? So it's a very, very positive word in Hebrew. So when it says, seek the shalom of the city, it's saying something more than just don't fight with the people there, or you want this city to not be at war. It's saying you need to seek the completion and the wholeness of this city. I think if I were to jump to the New Testament to even have an idea that could communicate this really well, where Jesus says in some versions, I came that they might have life and have it to the full, or have it more abundantly. That's this idea of shalom. Like, that's a good, I think, English way of saying it, is that you should seek the abundantness, to the fullness of the place where you live. That's what he's saying to this group of people that is in a place that they hate. They're not exactly in slavery, but they're maybe only just one step down from that. And he says, in this place that has taken you, I want you to seek that they would thrive, that they would abound. Well, why? Because when they do, you do. Okay? It's actually good for you, and God has called you to live in this way. So for us today, I think it's a little different than for them, because when we seek to invest in our communities or our workplaces or our schools, we're not doing it only because it's beneficial to us, but because we have a holy calling, right? So for us, this really showed up in one thing this past year in Chiang Mai. We had about a once every 100-year flood in Chiang Mai in October, where it just rained, rainy season, the riverbanks overflowed, and the entire city was completely flooded. Our house very narrowly escaped being flooded. We're pretty far from the river, but even our street, there were fish swimming down our street for about a week, so if that tells you anything. And our dog would bark at them, and it was very funny. But we were actually leaving on a trip to China right as this happened, and so we were able to house another family that their house was completely flooded, and they lived in our house while we were gone in China. But for us, this was a circumstance where we, in many ways, saw this happening, because there are lots of missionaries in Chiang Mai. But it wasn't just missionaries. Like, everyone worked together. Even the elephants, you see up there in that one picture, the upper right, even the elephants came together for the good of Chiang Mai. Why? Well, you could be, just very utilitarian thinking and say, we couldn't do ministry easily with the city flooded, but it was for the good of everyone. This was an effort that took 6 to 8 months before anything was really even back to normal, because it was so bad. And so for us, it was just, I think, a really good example of what I think Jeremiah is trying to say here, is that when something happens in the place that God has put you, you need to be a part of healing that and bringing wholeness to that, completeness, shalom. Okay, so one more quick example, of someone that I think really demonstrates this. This is one of our students, Pastor Ton, I'll just call him. That's the name he goes by, but he graduated from one of our programs back not this past May, but the one before. And he is a really good example of someone that I think is someone who is an exile in his own home, kind of like what we've talked about. He lives in Davao City in the Philippines, but his ministry is reaching out to medical students that are coming in from India. So in his city, there's about 5,000 to 6,000 Indian medical students. And a lot of people are really upset about this, right? It's a point of tension, because like, look at all of these immigrants, they're ruining our city. But he has seen it as a mission field, so he does campus ministry. And even though he's living in his home country, he lives in a very different culture, right? And he reaches out to these people and shares the gospel with them. The other reason I wanted to share about him is that he's a rare kidney condition. So for most of his life, he's dealt with this kidney condition. While we were doing the graduation, I was talking to him. He'd been on a transplant list for years. Now, since then, about 6 months ago, he did finally get a kidney. So that's really great news. But I use him as an example because as we transition into the last verse, the really well-known, important one, he's an example of a person that he could have very easily said, I have a rare health condition. People need to minister to me. He could have very easily said that and lived that way and thought that way, but he didn't, right? He knew that God had called him to do something, and so he went out and did it. And he knew that whether or not he got a kidney, God's plan was going to work itself out, right? And for me as well, I mentioned I was diagnosed with cancer during COVID, and then it came back a year and a half later. Now, it could have been God's plan to heal me, and that would have been good, but if it wasn't, it would still be good, right? And that's, I think, going to transition us into this last part, that we can believe this stuff because we hold on to true hope. And this is what that means. So recall, right before Jeremiah 29:11, you have verse 10. So Jeremiah drops the big news, right? Not 2 months, 70 years. And that's when he says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. So I always read this verse, and especially during this season of our life, Christians going off to college, and during the end of the year, you see all these graduation cards, and I see so many Jeremiah 29:11. Hey, graduate, I know the plans I have for you. You're going off onto this new adventure, and whatever. And so I always said I should make a line of biblically accurate greeting cards. And so I have a couple for you today. So the first one, this is the normal one you might see with the peaceful path or whatever. But then I thought it would maybe be more accurate to say, that plan might take 70 years to happen and you might be dead, but it's for your ultimate good. Congratulations, okay? Or another good one, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. That means being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Food is overrated. You've got this, graduate. Or, I know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Next verse. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So your purpose in life is to go through trials to make you more like Jesus. Congratulations. Oop, I lost my mic here. Well, the point here is that we really like these inspiring passages, right? We want to pick out the verse and not the context. So Jeremiah 29:11, first point, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. You is not singular. It's not you personally. I know the plans I have for you, my people, declares the Lord. This is what true hope means. Most of those people that were receiving Jeremiah's letter were going to be dead by the time that plan happened. Let's be honest. And he says, I have plans to prosper you and not to harm you. It's going to bring you a hope and a future. Well, how does that work out if I'm dead, right? That's the point. God's plans are much bigger than that. And when he calls us to a place that's difficult, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy, right? And so I got down on hymns earlier, but you guys sang some modern hymns. And there's a really good one that, sing the songs that you sang. You probably sang, I assume, Speak, O Lord, in this church before. Yeah, so I think it's the third verse. Really tunes into what I think is the message of Jeremiah 29:11. It says, Speak, O Lord, and renew our minds. Help us grasp the heights of your plans for us. Truths unchanged from the dawn of time that will echo down through eternity. By grace we'll stand on your promises, and by faith we'll walk as you walk with us. Speak, O Lord, till your church is built, and the earth is filled with your glory. So that's what I think Jeremiah 29:11 is saying, is that God has plans from the beginning of time. And he's working those plans out, and he's working them for our good, for the good of his people, for the good of his kingdom. But that might not always look like we want it to look. I'm going to actually skip this one right here. And it might look to you like something you don't want it to look like, right? So as we're kind of wrapping up today, I think the encouragement that he's leaving for people is to bloom in your Babylon, right? So God has placed you in this community, wherever it is that you live in this community. He's placed you in a job, a school, whatever other group you might be a part of. And for some of you, you might be really enjoying that. You're living a great life right now. Things are good. But maybe not. Maybe you're looking around and you're like, I hate my job, or what does this country come to, or whatever it is. And it's very easy for us to look around and just be ticked off all the time, right? Like these people that were taken into another land, they're taken as exiles, and they don't want to be there. People are saying, don't unpack your stuff because, you know what, you're just passing through. But Jeremiah says to them, unpack your bags and seek the good of the place where you are, whether it's your job, your school, whatever it is. And maybe it's not great right now. Maybe even you're going to die before you see what God is bringing to fruition. That's okay. Because his plans are true, they're strong, they're eternal, he is faithful. One of the reasons that I gave like a whole Old Testament background here is because that's the story of the Old Testament. It's a story of the Bible. It's a story of redemption, that things don't look good, right? We mess up, we fail, and God is faithful. And he is working this plan that he is planned before the dawn of time even. And he is working that out, and that plan is good. And even when it doesn't feel good to us, we can trust in that. We can trust in his goodness, his sovereignty, because we've seen it throughout all of the Old Testament. You know, like I gotta hammer the Old Testament, of course, but we have so many stories of God's faithfulness in the Old Testament, in part because it is the story of our family, right? It's not disconnected from us. These are God's people, and people that he chose in a plan that he was working from the very beginning. And these stories of his faithfulness are for us. And so I think even when for us it might be difficult, or you're in a place that you don't want to be right now, I think Jeremiah is speaking to you right now. Like, what are you doing in that place? God has planted you there for a reason. There's a purpose to it. He's working a plan. So seek the good of wherever that is, you know, whatever workplace or community it is that you're in, whatever that looks like, both because it's good for you, it's a holy calling, and as we, you know, go back to the main point here, like the key for us is understanding that we are exiles in this world, and if we are understanding that role correctly, it means seeing our exile as a mission that's built on true hope, not just circumstance, but true hope in God's faithfulness, his goodness, his enduring plan, right? And that's just my encouragement, but also Jeremiah's encouragement, I think, for all of us today as we think about our lives, what it looks like to live as God's people in a world that maybe we don't always agree with everything. We don't like what's happening. We don't like the place we're put. God is working good in us. He's making us more like Jesus, Romans 8:29, right? And he is revealing his good plan over the span of generations, and we are a part of that. So if you're in a good place today, I'm happy for you. That's great. But if you're not, just take heart in that, that Jeremiah was calling them to something that to them seemed very difficult, to have a good attitude, to put down roots in a place that was not their home, that they had been taken to. And I think he's calling us to the same thing this morning.